Hi, today I'm here with James Schramko, founder of SuperFastBusiness, a business resource in helping online business owners get more profit while working a lot less. He's also the author of Work Less, Make More, and host of the SuperFast Business podcast series. How are you doing today, James?
Good, thanks, Kison.
Hey, to kick things off, could you give us an intro to your background?
After school, I studied a bit of accounting, and then I went into debt collection when there was an economic fallout. It was my first full-time job. Went from there into credit with finance, so with a big automotive finance company, General Motors. And I did repossessions and then finance deals, and moved into the technology industry when digital telephones rolled out to Australia in an administrative task. And then I switched into sales. I started having kids, so I needed to make money. I got into a job at BMW. Within a year, I was number one in Australia for selling BMWs. And after 2 years there, I switched to Mercedes-Benz. And within a year of that, I was number one Mercedes-Benz salesperson in Australia. And I progressed through my career through sales management, general sales management, and eventually general management, running Mercedes-Benz dealership up until 2008, when I quit my job to go full-time online, which I'd been working on for about 2.5 years to the side of my job. And since the middle of 2008 to now, I've built up a few agencies. I had a website development business, a search engine optimization business. I sold both of those, and I've continued to coach people along the way. And these days I've got a few partnerships. I have about a dozen partnerships with business owners where I'm growing their business as a sort of silent partner in that. And then I'm still coaching people. So that's pretty much the whole thing.
I like the background because you did not only the accelerated career through the corporate landscape, but then you did the whole entrepreneur track from scratch. And I think you did the smart thing by starting off as a side and then waiting for the right timing and move into it full time.
I wasn't in a position to swing from one vine in the jungle and fly through the air and hope I catch something. And I do see a lot of people do that. And I think that is extraordinarily reckless if you have responsibilities like I did. I had 4 kids, maybe I had 3. No, I think I had 4 kids, definitely had 4 kids. And I had bills to pay, properties that I was purchasing and share portfolio that was geared. So I didn't really have the luxury of just stopping. It's totally different context than if you're in your 20s, like some of my kids are now. And they don't have kids, they're not married, they could live on someone's couch if they needed to, then in that case, I'd have different advice than what I had done for myself.
What are your top 3 principles that attributed to your success?
One is I think I'm good at questioning things. I'm a good investigator. And it's sort of the reverse of when I was a kid. I was quite gullible and I just believed everything. And I grew up as a typical normal kid and everyone else was different and my way was the way. And the older I get, and even now, I still get new layers of learning and recognition of how much was put there and how much we have to question that. So it extends into my team as well. I really encourage them to question things. And we use a Socratic method for learning and growing the business and developing ourselves. Another principle would be get going quite early. I'm not a perfectionist. I'll take a first version of something versus a perfect version of something later on. And I probably picked that up from reading about General Patton. He was all about violent execution of the first plan, even if it wasn't perfect. And then he'd just adjust as you go. And certainly in the online world, that has been extremely beneficial because the whole landscape changes so often that if you are not able to innovate, if you're not dynamic, then it's probably not the right place to be. And the third principle, it's come up a few times in my career, is integrity. It's actually a really rare trait. It's absent from a lot of marketing, from a lot of products, from a lot of businesses, from a lot of ethos, a lot of business bureaucracy and politics. You can all trace back to people just being selfish and doing things that are not nice for other humans in order to get ahead. And I've always had a different philosophy. It helped me be the top performer in my sales role by not being a salesy person. It's helped me have a fantastic, stable team that has been with me for almost 11 years now. It has helped me have customers who have stuck around for, in some cases, over a decade. They're on recurring subscriptions for more than 10 years. Some of my long-term customers, and even the high-level customers, a lot of them have clocked over 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And that's down to the fact that they have this absolute bedrock trust in that I am working, with the best intention for them to be better off.
I like all of these. Let's unpack
Cool.
them. That's the thing we do on BossMove is we unpack these things. We don't leave it there. We really want to turn them into some practical how-tos. The
Sure.
first one, questioning things, I like because I feel like school doesn't prepare us well or teach us that. We're sort of absorbing a lot of this information, but there's this art and science behind asking good questions that really allow you to learn, navigate conversations and things. So how do we take the idea of questioning everything into a
Well, I
practical
think we
form?
tap into our inner child a little bit, be more curious, seek to understand why things are, and don't just accept it. And as my grandfather taught me, he said, you really have to question anyone who you take advice from. If you're getting advice from a financial planner, ask them how wealthy they are. Ask if you could speak to 3 other clients who they've helped build wealth for. And you'd be disappointed if you go too far into those questions with the bad practitioner. You'll think, gosh, why would anyone trust this person or give them money? And there is a proliferation online of really bad advisors, bad coaches, people who have got a theoretical knowledge because they purchased a course, and then the first thing they do is go out and fake it till they make it. So this will protect you from making sinister mistakes. It will also, I think, give you a more rich and full life. My friends who I surf with, they're really astounded at my knowledge of surfcraft and the history of the sport and the difference between how many fins are on the board and what the contour shapes are and what it's made of and how the curvature of it. I've been thirsty for that sort of knowledge. When I go into something, I really want to understand it. And to do that, you have to ask the questions. And often it's as simple, and you probably already know this, Kison, because you have a podcast, as just going out and asking someone who has knowledge on this. And often they'll share with you because not many people are. And one of the major inflection points in my business journey was when I sought out a multimillionaire and I asked him if I can come around and interview him. Basically, I wanted to know the secrets, and I lobbed there after work. He said, yes, come around after work. And I think I spent hours and hours in the boardroom at his workplace grilling him. And he basically gave me all the lessons of life for hours, and then subsequently hired me to run his business.
Wow.
And it was a major turning point because nobody, he said, not a single person has ever even asked him, or taken any sort of lead or being curious about how or why. I was basically the only person that had popped up and said, tell me everything. And I also, in the field that I was working with the product of Mercedes-Benz, I had incredible clientele. I had everyone from famous sports people to movie stars to politicians to extremely successful in the money sense, which is another story of wealth building. And I learned a lot from them. They often shared with me lessons, especially when I was curious or took an interest or asked them about how they put themselves in a position where for them buying a $300,000 motor vehicle is just a normal day-to-day event. And they gave me their lessons and I applied them. And so I think being curious has big dividends. And especially when we encounter a dynamic that we have now out there around the world, you'd have to say we're in a time where things do change a lot. We get a lot of different messages and signals. If you throw in a pandemic and an election, we really have to have independent thought. We have to know a little bit more about our truth. And the only way to do that is to gather information and to reject some things and accept some other things and continually refine your mental model of the world.
First is to be curious, and being curious allows you to ask these good questions so that you can gather details and at times
Yes, and
discover.
then you can adjust, how your mental model accepts that. And we're all living our own reality. Like no two people are experiencing the same life. Maybe identical twins who are in the exact same environment, maybe if they're 5 years old. But other than that, we're all having a unique version of the world and our life experience. And I think I heard a great reference about our brain being a neck-top computer. And I think this is like tuning the software in our hardware. It's like upgrading the script or the patterns or the software programs so that You might be running Mac OS in your head and someone else is still on basic, and you're going to have a different experience in life.
That's another good view. You can utilize this approach to understand that as well and the other people's perspectives. I like the point you made about getting to the reality and truth of things, because some things may be not portrayed different from what the real authenticity is behind it. And then the other view, when you told your journey, essentially, you're taking opportunities in every interaction to learn something from someone along the way. So it's this platform and approach to really keep learning continuously from a variety of people that you interact with.
And it can come from anywhere. It's
So
like a guarantee, if you have a house, at some point, someone's going to knock on that front door and try and sell something to you because they have their agenda and they've got their model of the world, especially if it's religious based. They will have come up in their track of whatever the world looks like from their perspective. It would have been drummed into them from an early age, most likely. They'll be operating off a book. That's their script or their pattern, and they'll be trying to convince you that is the way. But I think having that independent thought to step back and says, well, okay, there's 7 other people with their book who say their book's the one. Which one is right? What are the lessons here? What are the commonalities? What could cause this? And I think it's really fascinating.
yeah, would you tell the person that struggles with the curiosity part, and I've seen this before, where they have a real difficulty of just being curious and asking those questions, creativity behind it. How do you get somebody like that going in the right direction?
I don't think you even have to be that creative. I wouldn't even have called myself creative until in the last 5 years. I've really opened up my creativity. I was very process driven before. Some people would have confused me with being a cyborg. I was extremely machine-like discipline, high work ethic, all the fantastic traits that would cause you to be hired as a general manager and to do a good job of it back in the day. But all the stuff's already been done. Like every book's already been written. Every possible thing you could ever think about is already on the internet. So you don't even have to be that creative. If you can Google, that's a good start. So people who are not very expressive or not wanting to bother anyone else could easily master the Google thing. And that is one thing they do teach kids at school now versus when I was at school. Most younger generation people are extremely good at research. Research has become more of a skill than, when I was a kid, we just had these books in a cupboard that the encyclopedia was like, that was the knowledge of the world there. And maybe you might find a National Geographic lying around a coffee table or something, but we had a pretty limited availability. We had the local library. And luckily for me, my father was very knowledgeable. He had a great general knowledge. He could finish a game of trivia in one turn sometimes. So I was lucky that he brought a good sort of general knowledge to my household. But for the most part, I think having the ability to research would be a good skill, and it ties in nicely with this topic.
Yeah, and you can almost research like questions to ask, and there's a lot of things
We
around.
can hire someone to research too. I often say to my team, so for example, a friend of mine, a really nice guy called 𝐁𝐸, I saw something he wrote about a concept called Icky Guy. This was quite some time ago and no one had heard of it then. It's very popular now. There's books on it. Pretty much everyone's jumped on this incorrect version of it, I might add, that's been popularized, where someone replaced a model for something else with the word Icky Guy. So there's a whole story to that. But at the time, I'd never heard of it. And I thought this was really interesting and it fits very well with what I do as a coach. So I said to my team, who are all younger generation, can you research Icky Guy, find out what it is and get me all the info? And they gave me this really long Google document full of information, like what is it, etc. And I recorded a podcast episode off that research document. And I think it was something like, what is Icky Guy? And we published it. And this must be 7 or 8 years ago now. And it then became very popular. We ranked number 1 or 2 in Google for what is Icky Guy for years. And the more I talk about it now, the more popular it becomes and the more people copy that idea. There's a lot of clones out there with, leaning into this philosophy because it fits well with what a lot of lifestyle designers or life coaches are trying to do. But that's a case where I didn't really know anything about the topic, but I knew that I needed to know about the topic. And I had some help. I leveraged the resource that I'm paying for, my team, to go out and enhance my knowledge. And then I took that burst of knowledge and then leveraged it further out to my audience and created a fantastic asset that, up until a few years ago was bringing us a massive amount of traffic to our site of the right kind of person who I can help, because they wanted to have a life where they're doing things they enjoy and where they get paid for it and makes them happy and all that stuff.
Very cool. Now I'm going to be checking out Icky Guy since you mentioned it.
We've got a great podcast about it, but I did a follow-up podcast with someone who actually knows about it and interviewed the proper authorities on it and discovered that it doesn't actually mean what people think it. He reverse engineered the history of how it got contaminated by someone lifting a different Venn diagram and sticking the word Icky Guy on it erroneously, and that got picked up and popularized. So it's one of those classic myths, like the Henry Ford quote, that if I'd ask people if what they'd wanted, they'd say a faster horse. It's never been attributed to Henry Ford, but it's a nice thought that it might have been. But it makes a good point.
Let's talk about early action.
Yeah.
You mentioned that sort of, hey, let's not wait around. Let's push for action sooner.
Yeah, I think back to Patton, he was all about a good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. The whole thing is like a good plan violently executed today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. It's important to talk about the execution. I think there's a lot of people who have romanticized ideas and they got this great idea, or they've in their mind when they purchase a $2,000 course, they've sort of already got the endorphins of the result that the course might have gotten because they ignored rule one and they didn't question the sales copy, and they basically went through a psychological travel through that sales copy, experienced the result of the product and then purchased, and then it's finished. We actually have to do things. And one of my great business mentors, even though he's not alive anymore, was Peter Drucker. And he was about doing the right things, not doing things right. And that's such an important distinction because, and I sort of touch on it in my own book, Work Less, Make More. We don't have to do a lot. Like the prize doesn't really go to the workaholic, the one who works the most, who is the most productive or works the most hours or has the least sleep. That's total hustle porn. It's ridiculous. The prize goes to the people who do the right things, even if there's not that many things. And then when you break it down into the 80-20 principle, that very few things you're doing actually have a big impact. So if you can identify those, then you get the big impact. So certainly when I went online, I did a lot of things. I was putting a lot out there, and this is Peter Diamandis' philosophy. He likes to try lots of things and some of them will take. He thinks you can work on many things at once rather than the other people who say, can only do one thing at a time. At least in my coaching, I always tell people do at least 2 business models. I want you to have 2 business models that protects you from having a complete and utter failure, but also one of them will invariably be better than the other. And then we can double down on that and go deeper with the one that takes off. So I really like this. I call it the catamaran theory. But I like having 2 things. Now, in order to do that, it means you can't be a perfectionist and you can't line up all your ducks in a row before you launch. And I see this. I've seen a new person come into the market, and there was a Facebook group where there's 70,000 people learning how to set up a membership site. And there was one post in there that at last count I saw had over 700 or 800 comments. And it was someone asking which version of their logo is better. And it was like 6 screenshots of an almost identical crappy logo with slightly different fonts and color. I'm like, if that's where you're at now in your journey to having a membership site, God help you, because it's like zooming in on the impossibly minute area of insignificance that will yield nothing. There's so many brands built with no logo.
It goes back to doing the right things.
Doing the right things. A right thing might be to find a customer who's got a problem that you can solve and ask them if they want to buy your solution. That would be my starting point.
And interview them to make sure you got the right solution and you're building the right product.
Like you send them an order request. And if they don't buy, then say, well, what's stopping you from purchasing? And narrow that gap until you can get to the point where they feel that they've got enough information, they have enough belief in your solution that it can do the job, that they feel they'll be better off. Then when they go ahead, then you can build that product out and make it perfect later. Do your logo down the track. When you're fully funded, you've got a valid idea and you want to sort of polish it up a bit, by all means, sharpen up that logo, go to town. Now, there are some industries, again, context. If you're selling beer and you're talking about beer cans, then of course that's going to have far more design orientation than your membership about potting plants or whatever. I just made that up, by the way. That's not the logo. So I don't want to throw them under a bus, but it's insanity.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Take action, get things going, almost that minimum viable product, at least get
definitely the minimum effective dose. Like, one of the things I do when I'm coaching business owners is I don't load them up with more things to do. I unload them. I say, take the backpack off. Look, here's a water bottle and a protein bar. That will get you to the summit. And when we get there, we'll have a great picnic or whatever. We'll pop the champagne, but you don't need to carry all the stuff up the mountain. Just take the essentials for now. And they're like, oh, really? This is so easy. And they're like, yes, strip it all away. Get down to what is the next thing that has to happen for you to progress forward. What is the shortest, simplest, easiest thing for you to do to get the job done? And then if you want to build it out from there, go for it. That's why I'm a huge fan of pilot programs, where you can try something and see if it works. And if it doesn't, no biggie. Like pretty much every TV show that you have endeared to your heart probably started as a pilot program that may or may not have gone ahead, depending on audience reaction or how well it floats with the studio or whatever the criteria is.
Great examples. Let's talk about integrity. How do you develop integrity?
That's an interesting, I haven't really thought of how you might develop it. It's pretty easy to lose.
The result, but yeah, what are the practical steps to get there?
Look, I think in my case, I would have to point to having had a good upbringing with great values from a nice mum and dad who were good, honest people. And I think for whatever reason, when I saw people doing things that didn't sit well with me, that didn't align with what my values were, it made me angry or annoyed or frustrated or disappointed. And going back to philosophy one, being curious, one of my clients was a professor of anthropology. And I had a great conversation with him. I said, tell me, why are we so selfish? Why do we operate out of such self-interest that we will burn another person just to get what we want? And then I read surveys, psychological surveys, where people were happy for someone to accept pain as if it's not them. They're happy to keep pushing a button to cause them pain in a test environment. He said, we are selfish. He said, we existed on the planet at the same time as another species. We're Homo sapiens and there was Homo erectus at the same time. And they had larger brains. They were able to solve complex social issues. He said, we were just cruising down to the watering hole with the spear. We knew when to hunt. And that was the difference. He said, we're basically survivalists. Our DNA wants to propagate. And in order to do that, we need to eat. We need to eliminate the enemy. We need to be the king of the tribe so we don't get ejected, and that we're attractive for the female so we can mate and propagate our genes. It's like the gene program in us wants to spread, and we'll do things in order to continue that survival. So once he explained that to me, it helped me understand human behavior even better. I think you can cross the line or not. Society has penalties for criminals who do nasty or bad things. So there are disincentives for doing bad things. But I think, one of the interesting ones I read was in an office environment, if someone thought they wouldn't get caught, they're very likely to take home office stationery, like pencils or pens or whatever. They'll take an office pen and not think twice about it. So I really think it's down to what program you're running. And what I have noticed is that my customers notice that trait. They look for it, and it's absent from a lot of people in the market. So if you have it, it's a really easy way to differentiate. If you never let someone down, if you always do something in their best interests, that doesn't take away from your interests, then that is a pathway forward that really does work. Carnegie talks about it. If you want what you want to help other people get what they want, or Zig Ziglar, one of those motivational type people, they're on the foundations of it. But I think, look, if you know that you could improve as a person, make changes, whatever happened. Back to point number 2, what would be the minimum change you would have to make to start down that path? Maybe it's today, do something nice for someone else that lifts the human race just one notch. That'll be a start. And next time someone asks you something and you decide whether you're going to tell a fib or tell the truth, then maybe just tell the truth and see if that makes you feel more refreshed or takes a burden off you, and lean into it a bit.
It's interesting because you almost have to identify where you may have that gap. Because one thing is, it is noticeable, right? If you have a level of integrity or a trustable person, people notice that. They sense it, and it comes off, and it's not linear, just an intuition that other people have. But as an individual, you essentially need to identify, hey, where that may be lacking. If you're a person that'll tell a lie here and there, and you probably know that, but there may be some things that you're unconscious about, and you need to essentially figure that out. And then, like you mentioned, what are those minimal steps to start making a change?
Look, you'll know if you promise things and don't deliver.
Yeah.
If you sell things and you can't back it up, if you're constantly late to pick your kids up from school, or you let your friend down when they wanted you to go out somewhere and you ghosted them, or if you're missing your client obligations, you'll know if your integrity is broken. And if you look up the definition of integrity, it'll really talk about being together and whole. And that's what it's about. It's like, get rid of the chinks in the armor, remove the feet of clay, and just lift yourself up. So if there were 4 categories we could have talked about, I mean, I only really thought about these when we started the call, but another one would be self-awareness. But I really think that ties in with the things we're talking about here. A mirror could be a great tool. That conversation you have with yourself is the most important conversation. You are your best asset in life. This vehicle that we have to carry our soul around, combined, if we look after it health-wise and mentally and tune it up, I think we can actually have a better life. Like, I saw some alarming statistic yesterday. It was somewhere around 80% of American households have a combined savings of less than $2,000. What that tells me is the average person out there is not having a wonderful life, that there's something is broken, and it starts with yourself. Stop looking, don't blame anyone else. Just bring the responsibility back to yourself. Be curious, tune up your operating system and see if it delivers you a better outcome. And it certainly has for me and the people I help, but I'm pretty sure it's universal.
I like everything you said. It's ultimately what it boils down to.
Yeah.
James, what's the best mistake you've made?
Well, I've made plenty, but I do try and make a lot less mistakes than I could have made by learning from other people's mistakes. I really hate that saying, fail fast, fail forward, all that, the whole failure focus thing. I call BS on that. Way better to observe other people's mistakes and just not make them. So as mistake free as I'd like to think I am, I've probably made a couple here and there. Probably should have bought more Bitcoin when they were cheaper. There's lots of obvious
That's like
things,
everybody's biggest mistake.
one of the ones I learned sort of early on, I started some partnerships about 10 years ago that didn't work out as well as they could have, because I was still not quite being fully responsible, or I chose, I didn't have good choosing criteria. So again, I wasn't doing the right thing. So one of them was fantastic, amazing partner, did everything we needed, but the market wasn't a good market to be in. So I learned that the hard way. I think it took we sold it, made maybe a couple of sales in the beginning, then killed it. And then 7 or 8 years later, another sale popped up because somehow they got to a page that was still live. Well, it wasn't a big seller. Another one, I went into a wildly successful partnership that was originally one of those classic 50-50 deals, but I ended up carrying the burden of most of the fulfillment and the feeding it, fulfilling it. It was essentially, I was doing 85% of the output, and I was sending off 50% of the dividends. It was a lopsided partnership that I couldn't right size. Had discussions around, can we adjust the split? No, I like it how it is. Would you like to buy it from me? No, I'm not interested in buying it. Could I buy it from you? It's like, how much? I say, how much? No feedback. It's like, in the end, I had to just start something new and just leave that to the side. At a conservative estimate, it cost me $500,000 over the few years that we had it. And it was a $500,000 investment in getting deals, the right structure. And the partnerships I have now, revenue share deals, they're very easy to calculate. I picked them extremely well. I've had a high success rate. My partners love them because they own the business. They're in control of the business. It's all theirs. I'm just a small stakeholder, and I get a reward for success. I get no reward for failure. So it's a much better structure. And I've really pioneered revenue share deals off the back of advice I got from 𝐂𝐸𝐿. He said that was his regret, that he didn't do more rev shares instead of straight coaching, because he could have got paid a lot more from the people who pay $25,000 for a workshop. He could have made $2.5 million in revenue shares or profit shares with those customers over the years if he'd done a different structure. I leaned into that, did my research, started doing those deals. So I'd say that early lesson in ways not to set up partnerships have benefited me now, where my top partnerships now are wildly successful and a much better business model. And I couldn't have gotten to that point unless I'd tried the other way or learned from someone else. Anyone listening to this can skip the $500,000 lesson. You just got it for free.
Yeah. You just turned it into a strength in partnership structures.
Exactly. And I think, from memory, I think I sell my introductory course on that for about $9 on my Superfast results site. Like I want other people to be aware that they have different options, because I think the number one complaint that I have about 50-50 deals is that usually the person is hoping the other person will do all the work. That they're not being fully responsible generally. It's extremely rare, even in marriage, for partnerships to survive the course. Like it's probably a 50% success rate would be high in any kind of 50-50 partnership, whether it's marriage or business. But I'd say in business, it's a lot lower. The success rate would be a lot lower. There's only a few duo acts that I can think of that have done particularly well, like Basecamp or Google or whatever. There's a few, but not many.
James, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time. If anybody wants to follow you, what's the best way to do that?
I'm on Instagram, but superfastbusiness.com is a great starting point. There's a bunch of podcast episodes, and I'm sure I've probably covered a lot of these things, whether it's in my Life Lessons podcast series or some of the other guests. And of course, I do coaching from that site. That's my bread and butter these days. I really like seeing people get results, and that's still satisfying to this day. Like I had a guy I surf with was moaning to me about how much he hated his job and he didn't like going to the city. And I said, why don't you do something about it? It was like, he's questioning me. That was point one. Point two is we worked out what would be the minimum steps for him to have to quit his job. And he did them. And I think 2 months later, he just got his first $8,000 recurring invoice paid, and his own business. He's now his own business. And I was like, I couldn't have been more, I think I was more excited than him. He calls me the liberator. James the Liberator, but I'm proud of him for having integrity to himself. So if you want to stack those three elements together, he created his own destiny by being curious and taking action and getting the right advice. And he's on a mission now. He's surfing twice a day. That's the best thing. Now I get to surf with him, instead of him hopping on the bus early in the morning and driving to the office. So like it's so
That's your
thrilling.
marketing model. Come surf more. Let me help you.
It is. I mean, work less, make more. Like whatever you want to do when you're not working, it's really fits with that whole philosophy. And for me, it's surfing. For a lot of my clients, it's bike riding or mountain climbing or Peloton riding or gaming. It doesn't matter. I mean, even for a lot of the people I help, it would be amazing if they could actually see their kids occasionally. When they start with me, some of them, they're always in the airport when I talk to them, like they're basically somewhere other than where they want to be. And that's what we should fix.
Thanks, James. I appreciate the conversation and look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Kison. Great to catch up.